Hello everybody. Today we are going to do an experiment. We are going to be making an estuary model. And so before we get started, I wanted you all to think about what is a model. So what is a model? Think back to school or to maybe a hobby if you've ever made a model car. What's the difference between a model and the real thing? So I'm going to give you 30 seconds to think about that. Okay, yeah, so a model is not quite the same thing as the real thing. This estuary model that we have here that we made ourselves is a plastic container with a plastic divider that we have and that we insert in here. And so we're going to be putting salt water on the right and fresh water on the left. And just like other models, like a model car, it's not as big as the real thing. This is obviously not as big as our real Padilla Bay estuary, but it can represent a concept or a specific thing that happens out in the estuary. And today we're specifically going to be looking at what happens when salt water meets fresh water and when they combine, what happens out in the estuary. And we get to see a nice, beautiful profile view of what happens out there. And so the salt water that comes into Padilla Bay is from the Pacific Ocean, all the way out from the Pacific Ocean. And we know that the ocean is 35 parts per thousand salt. So that is what the salinity is. And we have also learned that about 1 spoonful per cup is about how salty the ocean is. And so our picture over here has about 5 cups worth of water. And so we are going to add 5 spoonfuls of salt. As you could probably guess, we're not going to add any salt water to our fresh water. But what we do also want to add is some food coloring because we want to be able to distinguish our salt water from the fresh water when we mix them. And you maybe could tell, but that is not something that happens out in the estuary. We don't have nice yellow salt water and nice, really blue fresh water. So I'm going to do 5 drops of food coloring in each one. And now I'm going to stir it around because we want it to be nice and mixed up. I want to stir up that salt too. I want it to be all dissolved in our salt water here. Oh, this is taking some coordination, stirring at the same time. And spilling a bit, of course. Okay, the blue is nice and stirred up, but I want the salt water to be even more stirred up. So let's take a look at both of our pictures. They're both about filled to the brim. Even though we added some salt to our salt water, they're both about the same level. So now I'm going to pour them into our estuary model. And I want to try to pour at the same rate. Oh, and it looks like maybe some blue has bled through to the right side, but not too much. So what I want you all to do is I want you to make a prediction. What do you think will happen when I take out this removable barrier, this plastic divider? What will happen? And as a quick reminder, this yellow water represents salty water of the Pacific Ocean. And this fresh water, this blue water represents fresh water, maybe from the Skagit River, and it's come on through the Swinomish Channel to Padilla Bay. So what happens in Padilla Bay when the fresh water meets the salt water? Without further ado, I'm going to pull out the divider and let's see. Is it what you all predicted? I'm guessing some of you might have predicted that it would all turn green. And I do notice that there is some green in the middle here. So what I see is a layer of yellow on the bottom, a layer of green in the middle, and a layer of blue on the top. Does anyone have any guesses why that might be? You might be guessing that me adding salt to this picture on the right, the salt water, made it heavier or denser. So maybe if we weighed this water on the right on a scale and this water to the left on a scale, I bet the picture to the right would have weighed more. So it is denser. It took up the same amount of volume as the water on the left, but it had the addition of salt. So salt water is denser than fresh water. Do we think this is what would happen when the Skagit through the Swinomish Channel meets the salty water from the ocean? Maybe, but what I've noticed at Padilla Bay is a super, super shallow bay, and it's only about 8 feet deep at its deepest. And what happens every 6 hours, the tide goes in, and every 6 hours the tide goes out, and it just completely drains the bay. So there's a lot of mixing that happens in Padilla Bay. So those of you that predicted it would turn green, you are not wrong. It definitely does turn green. That salt water and that fresh water does mix, but it doesn't always mix right away.